أجمعين أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, yesterday we took, or not yesterday, the last lesson, we took the longest chapter, which is Akhbar, and that was, the first half was things pertaining to, specific to Usul al-Fiqh, such as the af'al, the actions of the Prophet ﷺ and so on, and then his approvals. And then after that, a lot of the things overlapped with Mustalah al-Hadith. Today, inshallah, we will take those chapters which are not found in other sciences as well. So sometimes there is a bit of an overlap. So in terms of when he talked about the beginning of Al-Kalam, there was an overlap with Arabic language, Arabic grammar, and a bit of Balagha, and so on. And the previous lesson overlap with Mustalah al-Hadith. Today, however, we will take, the topics that we will take all specific to, well, especially the first two are specific to Usul al-Fiqh, which are Al-Ijma' and Al-Qiyas. And then even the one after is also mainly Usul al-Fiqh. Even though you may find this, which is At-Ta'arud, when different texts and so on seemingly seem to be contradictory to one another. So it seems like there's a contradiction. How do we deal with them? And you might find this, in Usul al-Tafsir, for example, and so on, but it's mainly studied in Usul al-Fiqh. So these are the three chapters, inshallah, that we plan to take today: Al-Ijma' and Al-Qiyas and then At-Ta'arud, inshallah. So it's quite a lot, but inshallah, I believe that you guys are more than capable of understanding it. So we start off with Al-Ijma', which is consensus. The Shaykh, he says, and it's because now the Shaykh has kind of finished from everything to do with Quran, and in the previous lesson we finished from the Sunnah, right? And now we move on to the third main dalil, which is Ijma', and then the fourth, which we'll take after, which is Qiyas. And these four are generally agreed upon by the ulama. So the Shaykh starts off by mentioning the definition. So he says, the definition, consensus, linguistically means determination and agreement. That's linguistically, we don't need to go into that. And technically, it means an agreement between the mujtahideen of this ummah after the Prophet ﷺ on an Islamic ruling. So this is the definition of Ijma'. So Ijma', in simple terms, is that all of the ulama of Islam in a particular time agree on something. But if you want more technical definition, then it is this what the Shaykh has mentioned. So he says it is an agreement. So agreement, in that word, it shows that it's agreement of all, not one or two people, but all. That's why some ulama would also add in the word all, an agreement between the mujtahideen. Some would say an agreement between all of the mujtahideen. The word all, even though it can be understood from the sentence, some ulama have added that in to make it more clear. So it has to be an agreement of all of them. Okay. So اتفاق الجميع مجتهدي هذه الأمة, all of them. So if there's khilaf, if there's difference of opinion, then that is not considered ijma'. And even if it is the opinion of the majority, let's say all of the ulama say an opinion, but then we have one alim, Imam al-Shafi'i, for example, he differs. All of the ulama of Islam say something, but then Imam al-Shafi'i differs, for example, or it could be Imam Ahmad, or it could be, any imam, but one imam, he differs. That is not considered ijma'. That is not considered ijma'. It has to be all of the mujtahideen. And even though we could say the majority of the ulama said this, and only Imam Shafi'i maybe went against, then it could be used as a hujjah, a proof, like a secondary proof to support a claim. So sometimes when you say, okay, this is opinion, and the majority of the ulama say this, yes, it's true from one angle that it doesn't mean that just because the majority said it, that it's 100% correct. And there's many ayat talking about when you follow the majority, then, for example, وَأَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ, the majority of them do not understand. And there's many other ayat. And then at the same time, there's many ayat that show sometimes little could be correct. وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنْ عِبَادِي الشَّكُورِ, very few from my slaves are those who are grateful. Yes, so that side is correct. But at the same time, it can give strength to an opinion because it's the majority of the ulama. When you say majority of mujtahideen, we're not talking about normal people. So if on one side we got people like, let's say, let's take the same example that I gave, Imam Ahmad and Imam Malik and Abu Hanifa and all the other Salaf, okay, which might not be mentioned all the time because the main madhahib are four, but even all of the others. So we have Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, and we have Sufyan, both of them, and we have Al-Layth, and we have Al-Awza'i. So you get all of these great ulama on one side, then obviously it does give strength to it. It's not something that we can say, oh yeah, but they were just men, and brush it off to the side. No. We have to still have respect for that, for the Salaf and for their knowledge. However, with that being said, so with the fact that I'm saying that, yeah, it can give a bit of strength, and some ulama, may consider a type of proof in the sense that maybe not from the main proofs, maybe a secondary proof and so on, but it is not ijma'. It is not ijma'. Okay, so ijma' is by all the ulama agree upon it, that it is a dalil. As for the opinion of the majority, then it's not a clear-cut dalil. It's more of a murajjih, something which gives strength to an opinion, but not a actual dalil which is agreed upon by everybody. So the point being made is that when you say ijma', it has to be all of the mujtahideen. It has to be all of the mujtahideen. So even if one was to disagree, then it is not considered ijma'. If one was to disagree, it's not ijma'. What is it after that? Then that's a separate issue, and that's studied differently. But right now, is it considered ijma' or not? No, it is not considered ijma'. That's the main issue that we need to take from here. That even if one alim or mujtahid was to go against the opinion of everybody else at that particular time, then it is not considered ijma'. And what does it mean by mujtahideen? When you say mujtahideen, a mujtahid is the one who has the ability to extract the Islamic rulings from the evidences and sources, sources. So that's what mujtahid. So mujtahid is not a general layman who, even if he has listened to many talks, is not even a student of knowledge. Okay, so somebody like myself, not nowhere near a level of the mujtahideen. Not even maybe a specialist in a particular science. That's not mujtahid. A mujtahid is somebody who has the ability. Okay, and when you say ability, then ulama, we'll talk about right at the end of the book is Bab Ijtihad. We're going to talk a bit about who is a mujtahid, what are the conditions, and in simple terms, he has to be a specialist in nearly all the sciences. So he has to have knowledge of hadith and of fiqh and usool of fiqh and so on. And if he doesn't, then he's not considered a mujtahid. So we can understand from this that a mujtahid is not just a scholar, but it's the highest caliber of scholars. That's what we mean by mujtahid. So again, to explain this definition, we all know that we've understood now that it has to be an agreement between all of the mujtahideen. If one of the mujtahideen was to disagree and not agree with the others, then it is not considered ijma'. Okay, what about a person, let's say for example, all of the mujtahideen of this era right now, they agree on a matter. So we have the likes of Sheikh Fawzan and Sheikh Al-Uthaymeen and the kibar ulama, all of them agree on something. I come along and I say, no, I disagree. Would that be ijma'? Yes or no? I want you guys to answer. All of the kibar ulama agree upon something. I come along and I say, no, I disagree. I take the other opinion. Is that ijma' or not? You can just write it if you want. Yeah. So is that ijma'? Okay, 2 people have said yes, that is ijma'. Yes. Okay, why is it ijma'? I'm disagreeing. So it's not all. We said ijma' has to be an agreement between all of the. Because I am not a mujtahid. Okay, so even if I'm a student of knowledge or whatever I may be, if I'm not a mujtahid, then what I say doesn't matter. Whatever I say has no weight, has no authority, and it doesn't affect the ijma'. Okay, so I can agree with all I want. I can make Instagram posts. I can write a PDF. I can do whatever I want. It won't affect that. the validity of the ijma'. Okay. And then the Shaykh, he says, of this ummah. And we mean by ummah, he means i.e. from the Muslims. It means from the Muslims. The word ummah, when talked about in the Islamic text, can have two meanings. It can have two meanings, the word ummah. And right now, only one of them is intended. So let me explain what both meanings are, and then I will mention which meaning is intended. So, ummah, the first meaning is ummatu ijabah. Ijabah. So, ummah in the Islamic texts have two meanings. The first meaning is ummatu ijabah, the ummah who have answered the call. That's what you could translate it to. I.e., these are the Muslims. This is referring to the Muslims. And the second meaning is ummatu da'wah. Ummatu da'wah, the ummah of da'wah. And this includes the Muslims and the non-Muslims. This includes the Muslims and the non-Muslims. So when a certain ahadith or ayat, if the word ummah is being mentioned, sometimes the Prophet will say ummah, it could mean the Muslims and the non-Muslims. That could be an intended meaning. And in some instances, it could mean just the Muslims. In this context, ummah is referring to ummatu ijabah, those who have answered the call, i.e. the Muslims. So an agreement between all of the mujtahideen of this ummah, i.e. from the Muslims. So hence, even if there was somebody who was a non-Muslim, who was the most knowledgeable, and he fulfilled all of the conditions of ijtihad, if he was to disagree, it wouldn't affect the validity of the ijma'. Then he says, after the Prophet ﷺ, so that means that during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, there was no ijma'. Because the Prophet ﷺ was there. Any issue you had, you would go to the Prophet ﷺ. And then on an Islamic ruling. So if it was not an Islamic ruling, then that's not considered ijma'. So even if all the mujtahideen got together and they agreed upon a different ruling, then that is not considered an Islamic ruling. I'll give you an example, right? So for example, Al-Isnawi, he said, وَكَانَ إِمَامُنَا الشَّافِعِي, our Imam al-Shafi'i, he was the one that introduced this science. This science meaning usul al-fiqh. He is the one that introduced this science, bila niza', without any dispute. وأول من صنف فيه بالإجماع. And he is the first one to have authored in the science by ijma'. So he said, and our Imam al-Shafi'i was the one to introduce the science, usul al-fiqh, without dispute, and the first one to author a book in it by ijma'. Now, he has said by ijma'. Now, the first point is, even though we said Imam Shafi'i, there are some ulama, especially from the Hanafis, they claim that Imam Shafi'i wasn't, and it was actually Muhammad Shaybani. He was the first one. But the issue is that his book has not reached us, so we can't verify or validate that claim. That's why, the majority of the ulama all say Imam Shafi'i. But he has said the word ijma'. He has said the word ijma' in this statement of his. Al-Isnawi, he said that our Imam Shafi'i, he was the first one to introduce this science, by writing it and so on. And he was the first one to have authored a book by ijma'. Is his use of ijma' the correct use of ijma' from what we have learnt? So he said that Imam Shafi'i was the first one to write a book in Usool al-Fiqh by ijma'. By the consensus of the scholars, Imam Shafi'i was the first one to write a book in Usool al-Fiqh. So he has quoted ijma' upon this ruling, that Imam Shafi'i was the first one to write a book in Usool al-Fiqh. Is his usage of the word ijma' in this sentence correct or not? Imam Shafi'i was the first one to write and author a book in Usool al-Fiqh by ijma'. Is that correct or not? His usage of the word ijma'. Alhamdulillah, some of you have said no. One said yes because they meet the criteria of the mujtahid. Okay, Imam Shafi'i. Okay, he's a mujtahid, yes. But the answer is no. Why? You've got the mujtahid part. Okay, maybe. And all of the ulama who agree that mujtahidun. Okay, that's fine. And it's an agreement. Okay. Even though some have mentioned khilaf, but we don't need to worry about that right now. Let's say all of them have agreed. And the all mujtahideen, all from this ummah, all after the life of the Prophet ﷺ, but is it an Islamic ruling? It's not an Islamic ruling. That's not Islamic ruling. That's just a general piece of information. Imam Shafi'i, it could be linked to Islam and it's mentioned in the books, but it's not an actual Islamic ruling. An Islamic ruling is to do with salah, zakah, buying and selling, and so on. Okay, not to do with history. This is a historical ruling. Okay, this is a historical ruling. Inshallah, that makes sense. You understand now? Yeah. So, I could have made an easy one. I could have said, all of the mujtahideen agree that 5 plus 5 is 10. For example, everyone's going to say, no, that's not ijma', that's clearly not an Islamic ruling, that's a mathematical ruling. But we use this example to make it a bit more tricky. He is not a Sahabi. So, what's that got to do with the question? Ijma' is only Sahabi. La, according to this definition so far, according to this definition, in this definition, there's nothing restricting it to the time of the Sahaba and so on. Okay, the issue of the Sahaba we're going to get to shortly, but according to this definition, what we have taken so far. What is really meant by mujtahid? Sorry, I missed this explanation. In simple terms, a mujtahid is the highest caliber of scholars who specialize in each science, specialize in fiqh, in hadith, usul fiqh, and so on. And there's a separate chapter right at the end of the book. It's the last chapter or second to last chapter where we'll talk about it in more detail. Okay, so inshallah, you've understood the definition of usul fiqh from the wording of the Sheikh. Ijma' should also be bound to the Quran. So we're going to get to that. But we don't need to add that into the definition necessarily because the ulama wouldn't agree upon something unless it was taken from the Quran. So you wouldn't have to mention that in the definition. Okay. When it comes to definitions, there's ways of writing definitions and there's rulings. It has to be jami', mani', and so on. And then another thing is that it shouldn't be too long as well. So if there's things which are already understood from certain words, you don't need to add extra words to explain that. Okay. So the Shaykh, what he does is that the Shaykh he just carries on and explains this definition, and it's basically what we have said. Okay, it's basically what we have said. Let's read it. Okay, the Shaykh said, "What is excluded from our word agreement is the presence of disagreement, even if it's from one scholar. Otherwise, consensus cannot be claimed, even if one scholar. And what is excluded from our word mujtahideen are the common people and blind followers, as their agreement or disagreement on an issue is not paid any attention. And also what is excluded from our word this ummah is the consensus of other nations, as it also has no bearing. And what is not included by the words after the Prophet ﷺ is the companions' agreement during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is not considered a consensus in terms of being an evidence, because the evidence is obtained from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, from what he said, did, or approved of. As such, if a companion said, we used to do, or they used to do such and such at the time of, during such and such a thing during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, then that would be a ruling that is marfu', attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, and not consensus. And we talked about this. We talked about marfu' and the different types in the previous chapter. But it's not considered ijma', it is not consensus. And what is excluded from our words and Islamic ruling is the agreement over something intellectual or habitual. Then it has no place here, as research in consensus is an evidence similar to the evidences of the Sharia. Okay. Now the next issue that the Shaykh talks about is what's the proof that ijma' is a proof? What is the proof that ijma' is a proof? He's going to mention a few of them. The first is the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ. And thus we have made you a just community, ummah, talking about the Muslims, ummatu ijaba, that you will be witnesses over the people, meaning you will be witnesses over previous nations. So he's saying witnesses over the people includes witnessing over the actions and on the rulings of the actions, and the saying of a witness is acceptable. The point being is that if the ummah has been made a witness over the previous nations, that our ummah will agree that yes, the previous nations have received prophets and books and so on, and if this whole ummah as an ummah is a witness, that means that their testimony will be accepted. It will be accepted, and it is a proof. So that shows, we understand from here that whatever the ummah gets together on and agrees upon, then that is a proof. So that's how the Shaykh has extracted a ruling to prove ijma' from this ayah. That if the ummah is a witness and the testimony is accepted as a proof, then that shows that whatever the ummah agrees upon is also a proof. And some have also mentioned that the word ummatan wasata means just. It doesn't necessarily only mean in the middle, the wasat, but it can also mean just adl. And if anything is adl, then it is truth. So if the ummah all to get together, then that shows that they are adl, just, i.e. that shows that they are the truth. And if what the ummah gets together upon is a truth, then it is accepted. It is something which is accepted. That's also another way how that meaning is understood from this ayah. The second is the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ. And if you disagree over anything, refer it to Allah and the Messenger. Indicates that what they agree upon is the truth. In this ayah, Allah is saying that if you or Muslims, you disagree upon something, then to find the truth, go to Allah and His Messenger. Go to Allah in the Quran, or go to the Messenger in his life directly, or to his Sunnah. Okay, that's if you differ. If you don't differ, then it's the truth. If you don't differ, you don't need to go back to the Quran and Sunnah, because what you have all agreed upon is the truth. So how has the Shaykh used this ayah as a dalil to show that ijma' is a proof? He has used the opposite understanding. He has used the opposite understanding from this ayah. There's another ayah as well which the Shaykh hasn't mentioned, which I'll mention here before we go into the ahadith, is an ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nisa. In Surah An-Nisa, ayah number 115. Ayah number 115. Now, this ayah is one of the most famous ayat to show that ijma' is a proof, and there's a nice story behind it also with Imam al-Shafi'i. A nice story also regarding Imam al-Shafi'i. This ayah is وَمَنْ يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولَ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى وَنُصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمَ وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. The translation is that whoever defies the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى, after guidance has become clear to him, وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and he follows a path other than the path of the believers, نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى وَنُصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمَ وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. We will let them pursue what they have chosen, then burn them in hell. What an evil end. Simple terms, the ayah is saying, if you turn away from the Messenger and you turn away from what the believers believe in, then you'll be thrown into the hellfire. So you see the second part, and you turn away from what? وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. You follow a path other than the path of the believers, then you'll be thrown into the hellfire. That shows that by not following what the believers, their path, i.e. what they all have agreed upon, you will be thrown into the hellfire. That shows by following that, then that will lead you to Jannah. Showing that what the believers have agreed upon is a proof. Showing what the believers, i.e. the Muslims, have all agreed upon, then it is a proof, it is a dalil, it is a hujjah. Mashallah, the brother has sent the ayah into the chat also. If you want to send the English translation with it, that's also something good. And the story of Imam Shafi'i is that it's actually narrated that Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, was the first one to actually use this ayah as a dalil to prove ijma'. And it's a nice story because it's a nice fact I want to mention, which we have kind of indicated to before when we talked about Imam al-Shafi'i in our introduction of Usul al-Fiqh. When we talked about Imam al-Shafi'i being the the founder, or the first one to author a book in Usul al-Fiqh. We mentioned some of the reasons why Imam al-Shafi'i was able and qualified to be that first person. And there were a few points, and I said I'll talk about this more later on. This is the story I was referring to. Now, regarding this ayah, Imam al-Bayhaqi, he narrates that Al-Muzani and Al-Rabi' ibn Sulaiman, Al-Muzani and Al-Rabi' ibn Sulaiman, both of them are imams from the Shafi'i madhab and students of Imam al-Shafi'i. The first one is called Al-Muzani and the second is Al-Rabi' ibn Sulaiman. They both said, كنا عند الشافعي إذ جاءه شيخ فقال له. We were with Imam al-Shafi'i when an old man came and said to him. We were with Imam al-Shafi'i when an old man came and said to him, أسأل, can I ask? Can I ask a question? قال الشافعي سل. Imam al-Shafi'i said, ask. قال إيش الحجة في دين الله? What is a proof? What is the proof in the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? فقال الشافعي, so Imam al-Shafi'i said, كتاب الله, the book of Allah. قال وماذا? And then after saying the book of Allah, this old man, he said, وماذا, and what? قال سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, the sunnah of the messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم. قال وماذا? And then he said, and what? قال اتفاق الأمة. Imam al-Shafi'i said, the agreement or the consensus of the ummah, of this nation. And he means ummatu ijabah. قال ومن أين قلت اتفاق الأمة من كتاب الله? So this man, he asked, from where have you said, from where have you taken that the consensus of this ummah is a proof from the book of Allah? What is your proof from the Quran that ijma' is a proof? فتدبر الشافعي رحمه الله ساعة. Imam al-Shafi'i, for a period of time, he was just pondering, thinking about the answer to this. فقال الشيخ, so this old man said, أجلتك ثلاثة أيام. I give you 3 days. I give you 3 days to get back to me. فتغير لون الشافعي. The color of Imam al-Shafi'i changed. ثم إنه ذهب فلم يخرج أياما. Then Imam al-Shafi'i went and he stayed in his house and he did not leave his house for a number of days. Obviously, he left for salah and so on. But other than that, he was in his house. He didn't leave. قال فخرج من البيت في اليوم الثالث. And then he left, Imam Shafi'i left his house on the 3rd day. فلم يكن بأسرع أن جاء الشيخ فسلم فجلس. And it was really quickly and swiftly that Shaykh, he came, the old man, he came, and he gives salam to Imam al-Shafi'i, and he sat in front of Imam al-Shafi'i. فقال حاجتي, my need, the question that I asked, which was, where is your proof from the Quran that ijma' is a dalil? فقال نعم. Imam al-Shafi'i said نعم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله عز وجل ومن يشاقق الرسول من بعد ما تبين له الهدى ويتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين نوله ما تولى ونصله جهنم وساءت مصيرا. So Imam Shafi'i basically recited this ayah. And then Imam Shafi'i said, لا يصليه جهنم على خلاف المؤمنين إلا وهو فرض. A person is not thrown into the hellfire for going against the believers except that it is a fard. I mean, the only reason he was thrown into the hellfire is because he went against what the believers agreed upon. And if he's thrown into the hellfire for that reason, that shows sticking to what the believers agreed upon, i.e. sticking to the ijma' is fard, it's something obligatory. Meaning, if there is ijma', we have to stick to it. فقال صدقت. So then this Shaykh, he said, you have spoken the truth. وقام وذهب. And then he got up and he left. And now this is the sentence now I really want you to ponder over. قال الشافعي, Imam al-Shafi'i said, قرأت القرآن في كل يوم وليلة 3 مرات حتى وقفت عليه. I recited the Quran every day and night 3 times until I came across this ayah and until I stopped upon this ayah. I recited the Quran every day and night 3 times until I stopped on this ayah. And this is something, we need to ponder over, that look how the Salaf were and their relationship with the Quran. Imam Shafi'i, he got asked one question, he recited the Quran 3 times. And obviously he's not reciting it quick because he's pondering over the meaning. And he's pondering, reading, thinking 3 times until when he got to this ayah, he realized that this is the dalil for Ijma'. So subhanAllah, that shows the relationship of the Salaf with the Quran. And it also shows how much difficulty and how much efforts they exhausted when they wanted to seek knowledge, especially when it came to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it also shows the status of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, and that answers the question that we talked about in our introduction, when we talked about what were some of the reasons that allowed Imam Shafi'i to be qualified to be the first person to write a book in Usool al-Fiqh. Now, the third point, the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, Ummah will not unite upon misguidance. That is a hadith. Now, this hadith, there's some, is weak. And the ulama talk about it, they differ over its authenticity. And there are many other ahadith also which have similar meanings with similar wordings. But all of them have some issues with them. All of those ahadith with similar wordings, all of them have issues with them. However, one could say that all of those ahadith, when put together, when he talked about different types of ahadith, when put together, it could strengthen it. It could strengthen the hadith, which takes it out of being in the level of weak, and it could make it hasan li ghayrihi. And others have even said that because there are so many ahadith, then it actually takes it to mutawatir. But mutawatir al-ma'nawi. This is something I didn't mention in explanation, but somebody asked the question, meaning mutawatir in terms of its meaning. So it's not the exact wording, but the general meaning is mutawatir. The general meaning is mutawatir. Meaning my ummah will not unite upon misguidance. Meaning if the ummah does unite upon something, then it is not considered misguidance, i.e. it is the truth. i.e. it is the truth. No. And then the last dalil is more of an intellectual dalil. The Shaykh, he says, so we say the consensus of the ummah on something is either true and can be false. If it is true, then if there's evidence, and if it's false, then how can this ummah, that is the most honorable of nations to Allah, since the time of the Prophet ﷺ until the coming of the last hour, unite upon something false that Allah is not pleased with? This is from the greatest impossibilities. So this is also aqlan, intellectually or logically, the Shaykh is trying to prove this point also. But we have the ayat and we have the hadith, which suffices us anyway. The next point we move on to now are the different types of ijma'. The different types of ijma'. Ijma', now the Shaykh is going to split ijma' in terms of how strong ijma', these two types of ijma' are. In terms of how strong these two types of ijma' are. Now, so so far we have taken that if the whole of the ummah, if all of the mujtahideen from this ummah after the life of the Prophet ﷺ agree upon an Islamic matter, then when they all agree at one time, if they all agree, then it is ijma'. Okay, that's also another thing with the definition. Some ulama have also added in the definition, it has to be at one time. Ala kulli hal, we don't want to go into too much with the definition. But the point being is that that's what ijma' is. But Are all ijma', all of them, the same level? And the answer is no. And we're going to split ijma' into different types now. And the first type that we are splitting it into is ijma' in terms of how strong that ijma' is. So this is of two types. The first is qat'i, and the second is dhanni. The first type is qat'i. Qat'i, we could say clear cut. We could say it is clear cut. And the Sheikh has explained it. What is known to have occurred in the ummah without any doubt. I mean, this is that type of ijma' where there's no doubt in it whatsoever. Every single person would know, such as the consensus of the necessity of the 5 daily prayers and the prohibition of adultery. And this type of consensus, no one can deny that it is an evidence. And the one who does so, has disbelieved if he is not from those that don't know. Meaning, if somebody is new to Islam, maybe he might not know. But other than that, a person can't turn around and say that it's not obligatory to be 5 daily prayers. That's not no without ijma', that's ijma' qat'i. That's something where there's no excuse in a person not to follow and not to believe in. And that's why some ulama, such as Imam al-Shafi'i, they call this ilmul amma. This is like the knowledge of the general people or the public knowledge. Okay, this is something that everyone knows. This is something that everyone knows. The second type is al-dhanni. Al-dhanni is, you could say, assumed, or maybe not assumed. It's basically the opposite of clear cut. Okay, let's take a definition to understand what it means better. What cannot be known except through research. What cannot be known except through research. Meaning, this is something that you have to look into. You have to look into the texts. You have to make sure, you have to make research, have the ulama. There might be an issue, you don't know. Is there ijma', is there not? So you have to look into it. Which ulama have quoted ijma'? Is there khilaf, is there not? So these are generally those more minute details, more minute issues. So that is considered al-dhanni. That is considered al-dhanni. And then the Shaykh, he says, the scholars have differed in the actual possibility of it being proven. And the most correct view is that of Shaykh al-Islam in Aqeedah al-Wasitiyah. The consensus is what was enjoyed by the Salaf, for after them, a lot of differences occurred and the Ummah spread. This type, so in like certain fiqh issues and so on, and some examples will come later, inshallah. Ulama actually differ. They don't differ, is it a dalil or not? No. If ijma' is taking place, it's a dalil. But now this issue, they differ, that can it actually take place? Can we be in a scenario where we know that all of the mujtahidun of a specific time can get together and actually agree upon an issue? Can that actually take place? Now there's different issues, there's different opinions of the ulama, okay? Some have said yes, it can take place in all times, okay? Because of the generality, because of the generality of all of the proofs that prove ijma'. All of them, they don't have a specific time limit, meaning all of these ayat and ahadith are am. They are am. They have not, or they are mutlaq. They are not restricted to a particular time. Okay. And some have said that no, it can't take place. No, it can't take place because people are in some, sometimes some ulama may give an example of ijma', that if, let's say there's 10 mujtahidun at that time, they get together and sit at a table and to all agree that's ijma'. Some might give that example just for understanding that everyone agrees, but in reality, who does that? So is it possible all of the mujtahidun actually get together and actually agree? So some have said no. And then some have gone in the middle, and said that it is only during the time of the Sahaba. Okay, and some have taken it a bit further and said only the time of the Salaf. Okay, and the reason for that is because the time of the Sahaba, and this is the opinion of Shaykh Islam and also the author, is that at the time of the Sahaba were mainly only one place. They were only in Medina and a few other countries, but they were known. It wasn't that much. Okay, so you could easily work out what everyone's opinion is. But after that time, now Islam is expanding. It's expanding, and so many people are accepting Islam. Firstly, you don't even know who all of the mujtahidun are, because there's so many. And secondly, is it possible to get all of their opinions on an issue to see have they all agreed? That's very difficult for it to take place. So that's why some ulama have restricted it to just the time of the Sahaba. And like I said, that's the opinion of Shaykh al-Islam and also the author, rahimahullah. And even though Shaykh al-Islam says the word Salaf, in another place, in Madbu' al-Fatawa, he says, Al-ma'lum minhu huwa ma kana alayhi as-Sahaba. What is known from it, from the Ijma' is what the Sahaba were upon. So he clearly says the word Sahaba. So what he means by Salaf, you can understand, that means the Sahaba. وَمَا بَعْدًا فَتَعَذَّرَ غَالِبًا. As for فَتَعَذَّرَ غَالِبًا. As for after that time, the majority of the time, we can't be 100% sure. وَلِهَذَا اختلف أهل العلم فيما يذكر من الإجماعات الحادثة بعد الصحابة. And that's why ulama differ regarding some of the ijma'at that have taken place after the time of the Sahaba. So that's why just because somebody quotes ijma', a particular scholar quotes ijma', doesn't mean necessarily that straight away, khalas, we believe him and we blind follow him just like that. No, we don't do that. We have to look into it. And to be honest, time of Sahaba is clear, but also time of the Salaf, I think we can't totally disregard it also. We shouldn't totally disregard it also, wallahu alam. Each issue should be looked into. And if it's, if you look into and you have found that all of the ulama and the fuqaha and so on have agreed upon something and no one's going against it, that's a strong indication that that is ijma'. But the ulama, like I said, do differ in the possibility. They're not differing, is ijma' a dalil or not? They're differing on the possibility of ijma' taking place. Then the Shaykh, he says, so beware that it is impossible for the Ummah to unite against an evidence that is both clear and authentic and not abrogated. For it will not come together except upon the truth. So if you see a consensus that you think to be in opposition to that, look more carefully. Either the evidence you have is not authentic, unclear, abrogated, or there is a disagreement in the issue that you are not aware of. The Shaykh here talks about a very important principle when it comes to ijma'. And this principle is that this ummah, ay ummatu ijaba, it is not possible for it or for them to agree upon the opposite of a authentic, clear-cut, non-abrogated proof. It is not possible for this ummah to agree upon the opposite of an authentic, clear-cut, non-abrogated proof. And what this basically means is that if you see an ijma', okay, and this is what one of the brothers mentioned in the chat. Whenever we say ijma' is not a dalil because of ijma'. It's because, when you have something called mustanad al-ijma'. You have something called mustanad al-ijma', meaning the ulama, when they mention ijma', they say there's ijma' in this issue. Then they'll normally mention what's the mustanad of ijma', meaning where have they taken this ijma' from? Meaning ijma' is based upon the Quran and Sunnah. It's based upon the Quran and Sunnah, and it never goes against the Quran and Sunnah. It's based upon the Quran and Sunnah, whether it's directly from ayah, hadith, or the general principles, or whatever the case may be. It doesn't go against the Quran and Sunnah. So if you see a consensus and you think, and then you see an ayah and you think, how is it that this ijma' is going against this dalil? It's going against this ayah. It seems like it's going against this hadith. The Shaykh is saying, no, then there's an issue. Okay? If that is the case, then there's a problem somewhere. And Shaykh mentioned a number of things. Firstly, he mentioned either that dalil is not authentic. So you bring a hadith, maybe it's a da'if hadith. Okay, or it was a fabricated hadith. It's not authentic hadith. Or maybe it is ghayr sarih. It is not clear cut in that issue. Meaning, yes, the hadith is authentic, but we can't, that hadith does not apply to the issue that we are talking about. It applies to other issues, but it's not applying to this issue. And how do we know that we use usul al-fiqh? We look at the wording. Maybe it's not, maybe it's am, or maybe it's specific. Okay, maybe specific to a different scenario, not this scenario, and the person misunderstood, or whatever the case may be. Or maybe you think it's a commandment, and then saying mustahab. The ijma' is that it's mustahab. That shows that there's a secondary delil somewhere to prove that this commandment is not obligatory, meaning that this it's not clear cut for this issue. Or the third is that it's abrogated, that it's authentic, it's fine, it shows this issue, but it's abrogated by another proof, or it contradicts another proof. Okay. Or lastly, the Sheikh said, or there is a disagreement in the issue that you are not aware of, or the ijma' is not established. That ijma' itself is not established, meaning somebody's quoted ijma', but there's actually not ijma', there's actually khilaf. There's actually some khilaf, okay? So I've said there's ijma', but if you actually read the books, if you look in, you find that, okay, this scholar and this scholar actually did differ. So there's not ijma'. So there's not ijma'. And we're going to talk about quoting and which scholars, quote ijma' and so on. We're going to talk about it in the conditions. So that is a very important principle that Sheikh finished off this this topic about. And now we move on to the next topic, which is the conditions of ijma'. Now, ijma' has a number of conditions. The first condition, he says conditions of consensus. The conditions for consensus include that it is proven via an authentic route, so that it is either famous amongst the scholars or it is conveyed to us from a trustworthy source who is well read. The first is that it has to be this ijma' has to be proven through a authentic route, and that links to the previous point that we were saying. And the Sheikh mentions two ways that this takes place. Either it's something that's well known amongst the scholars, like it's just well known, so all of the scholars know and all the scholars have quoted it. Okay, that's ijma'. Or number two, it's been conveyed to us from a trustworthy source, i.e., who is well read. We have certain scholars who are trustworthy, and not only trustworthy, but they are well read, meaning they have they have read a lot of the all of the works of the Salaf and so on, so they know who said what. For example, Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he gave me an excellent example, especially when it came to the madhahib and the fiqhi opinions of the Sahaba. He was one of the most knowledgeable people regarding the opinions of the Sahaba, and that's what made him so strong. One of the things that made him so strong in his knowledge. So people like him, or Ibn Hajar, for example, or Ibn al-Munzir, or Ibn Qudamah, scholars like this, these people are well read. Okay, so you can clearly see in their books. Ibn Qudamah's got Mughni, Shaykh Islam has all these books. We have Majmu' al-Fatawa, for example. So these are those scholars who are well read. So when they quote ijma', then that is generally something that we can accept, that yes, this is a correct form of ijma'. Unless we find a clear, we find a proof that actually, they made a mistake or whatever it may be. Otherwise, if they have said something, then we should take that ijma'. We should take that ijma'. And at the same time, when we have these well-read ulama, at the same time, there are also those who may not, some ulama who are a bit more lenient in quoting ijma', meaning they say ijma', but it's actually not ijma'. And some of those ulama, scholars have mentioned that from them, Ibn Abdul Barr, also Ibn Rushd, and even Imam al-Nawawi sometimes, So many times you'll see that they quote ijma', but it's not ijma'. And this could be for many reasons. Maybe they're not as well read in certain, in the madhahib, so they quote ijma' and it's actually not. Sometimes it's because their understanding of ijma' is slightly different. So for example, Imam al-Nawawi, for example, sometimes if all of the ulama says something, but you have one group called the Zahiriyya, okay? I don't want to go into who they are, but if they were to say an opinion, Imam al-Nawawi wouldn't consider their opinion. He would say, because they don't believe in qiyas and so on, he would say that their opinion doesn't matter, and he wouldn't include them into mujtahideen. So he would quote ijma'. Even if they disagree. But then the rest of the ulama say no, they're still ulama, and if they disagree, then it's not ijma'. Or sometimes when certain ulama say ijma', they don't mean the actual definition of ijma' that we are talking about. Maybe they just mean ijma' in their madhab, for example. So all of the scholars in, let's say, if a Shafi'i saying it, then Shafi'i could mean ijma', i.e. ijma' all of the scholars of our madhab. Some ulama have used ijma' for that meaning also. Okay, some ulama have also used it for that meaning also. So that's why in the previous quote that I mentioned in the beginning by Al-Isnawi, he says that Imam al-Shafi'i was the first one to write a book in Usool al-Fiqh by ijma'. Some ulama have excused him and said, well, what he means is ijma' in their madhab, in the Shafi'i madhab. Some ulama have excused him by giving that answer. Okay, but the point being is that there are some ulama who are a bit more lenient. So we have to look, when just because somebody quotes ijma', it doesn't necessarily mean it's ijma'. We have to look into it more precisely. The second is, it is not to be preceded by a firmly based disagreement. If it is the case, then there is no consensus because the statements are not void simply because the one saying them has died. What the issue here is, for example, let's say in the time of Sahaba, some Sahaba had this opinion, had opinion number one, and other Sahaba had opinion number two. Then after the Sahaba passed away, radiallahu anhum, the Tabi'een came along, and all of the Tabi'een agreed upon opinion number one. All of them agreed upon opinion number one. Is that ijma' or not? Is that ijma' or not? The ulama differ. This is an issue in Usool al-Fiqh, the ulama differ. And the Shaykh, his opinion is that no, that is not ijma'. So even though at one time all the ulama have agreed, but it's not considered ijma'. Because, he says, statements are not void simply because the one saying them has died. And that in Arabic is al-aqwal la tubtilu bimawti qa'iliha. Al-aqwal la tubtilu bimawti qa'iliha. Bimawti qa'iliha. Meaning that an opinion doesn't, it's not become void. It doesn't go away just because the person who said it has passed away. If he said it, okay, then it's an opinion, and that opinion remains. So, according to this opinion, if in the example that I gave, if the Tabi'een all got together, it is not considered ijma'. Now there are some ulama that say, no, it is ijma', because at one time they've all agreed. Okay, now, and another answer is that, and it's another issue in Usul al-Fiqh, but upon this opinion that Shaykh has mentioned, they say that if there's two opinions, then that's also like an indirect ijma' that there's only two opinions. Okay, so it's an indirect ijma'. So all the Sahaba have agreed upon that there are only two opinions, either this or either that, one of the two. So if there's ijma', then we can't go. So if they all agreed upon that there are two opinions, then once an ijma' is established, you can't break that ijma'. So that's another maybe answer that they give. Like I said, it's a khilafi mas'ala. The ulama differ, and these khilafi masail, even though the Shaykh hasn't really mentioned them, I'm not going to go into depth in this book. If you study a bigger book, then each point that we mentioned, many of them ulama do differ and so on. We can go into more depth. Who says what are their proofs, and what the answers, we can go into it more depth. That's books like Rawdat Nadhr, for example. That's that's what's studied in there. But for now, you just need to know. And because it's a famous issue, I did mention the khilaf generally for you. One person may say, what's the benefit of this? The benefit is that those who come after the Tabi'in in the same example, they should follow what the Tabi'in followed. Obviously, if those that say it's ijma', then you have to follow it. But even those that say it's not ijma', then it's not ijma', then it's not compulsory to follow what the Tabi'in have said. However, in terms of ijma', however, in terms of if all the ulama have now agreed, then it should be followed. But if it is ijma' or not, if those that say it is ijma', then it becomes binding upon those after them. And those that say it's not ijma', then it doesn't become binding upon those after them. Then the Shaykh, he says, so consensus cannot remove former disputes. Okay, rather it deters disputes from taking place at all. That's the benefit. So after that, we can't bring new opinions. And this is the most correct opinion due to the strength of its objection. It has also been said that it is not stipulated, so it is correct that people in the second era gathered upon one of the statements of the previous generations, then they would be an evidence for those that come after them. And in the view of the majority, it is not a condition that the era of those that had a consensus finish, so that the consensus from the people of consensus thereafter can come into play simply because they agreed upon it. It is not permissible for them or other than them to object to it after that, because evidences that show the consensus to be approved does not necessitate the ending of one era, and the consensus is achieved from the moment they agree upon something. So then who is the one that would remove it? Might be difficult. Sometimes when you translate from Arabic to English, you have to be careful. You do want to translate it word for word, but at the same time, you do want to make it make sense. What this basically is talking about is another issue now. It's talking about a different issue. And this issue is called انقراض العصر. انقراض, so alif, hamza, nun, qaf, ra, alif, dad, like ولا الضالين, لا ضاد. انقراض العصر. Asr means era, okay? The finishing or the passing of an era. What this basically means is that, let's say, for example, we have 10 mujtahidun. 10 mujtahidun all agree upon an issue right now. Okay, right now, 10 mujtahidun all agree upon an issue. Is that ijma'? As soon as they agree, is that considered ijma'? Or is it a condition that all of them have to pass away upon that opinion, and once they passed away, then that is considered ijma'? Then that is considered ijma'. So for example, let's just make it easy. In 2022, everyone, all the mujtahidun agree upon a certain issue. And then in 2023, they all pass away. Let's say they all pass away at the same time, okay, just to make it easy. When does this ijma' take place? Does it take place in 2022, or does it take place in 2023? Okay, that's the issue. That's the issue. And the ulama do differ in this. Okay, and there's a benefit of this as well. Like, why? What's the benefit of this issue? Why are we differing over this issue? Those that say it takes place in 2022, that means khalas, as soon as that ijma' takes place, no one can go against it. And even those mujtahidun, they are not allowed to retract. But if we say 2023, okay, then that means ijma' does not take place. People can't go against it. And even those mujtahidun, if they took that opinion, they have that time period to retract. So maybe a month later, they turn around and say, actually, no, I've changed my opinion. And if they have changed their opinion, then ijma' is no longer established. That's the benefit. What does the Sheikh say? The Sheikh says, I'm going to read the Arabic. The Arabic is a lot easier for me. He says, وَلَا يَشْتَرِطُ عَلَى رَأْيِ الْجَمْهُورِ انقراض عصر المجمعين. Which in the English here, and in the view of the majority, it is not a condition that the era of those who had consensus finish, so that the consensus from the people of the consensus thereafter can come into play. He says it's not a condition. He says it is not a condition. Right? So that would mean in the example that we give, the ijma' would take place in 2022. So it's not a condition they all have to pass away. As soon as they agree, then khalas, ijma' is established. And this is the opinion of the majority of the ulama, and also the opinion of the author, as you can see. And what are the proofs for this? There's a number of proofs. The first is that all of the proofs for ijma' are mutlaq, meaning unrestricted. They are not restricted by this condition. Not one dalil says that they all have to pass away. So why are we restricting it? They are not am, they are mutlaq, unrestricted. So why are we restricting it? And the second is that if they all agree, then agreement's taken place. Khas, agreement's taken place. And they've all agreed. And if they've all agreed, it has to be the truth. لا تجتمع أمتي على الضلالة. My ummah does not agree upon misguidance. So if they all agreed, then how can we go against it? Because the agreement has taken place now. The agreement has taken place. Now, so that is regarding that issue of ijma'. No. So can they retract? No, because ijma' has taken place. So according to this opinion of the Shaykh, which is the opinion of the majority of the Usooliyun, that no, they cannot retract because it has taken place. Right. The next issue is when some of the mujtahidun make a statement or do an action and it becomes well known amongst the people of ijtihad, and they do not object to it whilst they have the ability to do so, then it is said that this is consensus. It is also said that this is an evidence but not consensus. And it has also been said that it is neither an evidence nor consensus. Lastly, it has been said that if they pass away before making any objections, then it is consensus because their continued silence until they passed away whilst having the ability to speak against it is itself a proof of their agreement to it, and this is the closest statement to the truth. This is an issue known as Al-Ijma' As-Sukuti. Al-Ijma' As-Sukuti. This is the type of Ijma' that we are talking about now. Ijma' As-Sukuti, you can maybe translate to the silent Ijma'. The silent Ijma'. Now, Ijma' As-Sukuti is the scenario of it is some mujtahidun. So let's say there are 10. Actually, in this case, 10 wouldn't really, make sense. Let's say there are 100 mujtahidun. But 10 of them have now said, they've all agreed upon opinion. Okay, or maybe even more, okay? Point being is that some of them have said it. And now this statement becomes widespread. It's not a statement that just one person, it becomes widespread. Okay? However, we don't know what all of the other remaining mujtahidun have said. They've just remained silent. They've not said yes, they have not said no. They've just remained silent. Okay? Is that ijma' or not? Because we said they all have to agree, but we don't know. They've not said yes, nor have they said no. They've not got against it, nor have they agreed. So is that considered agreement or not? Again, this is another issue where the Usuliyin really different. And as now you can see, subhanAllah, how much Usul al-Fiqh actually has, how much of an effect it actually has on fiqh. And it's not as simple as saying ijma'. You should look into it, what type of ijma', and look into it more. And this is something that the Usuliyin actually differ so much that there's actually about 12 opinions. There's 12 different opinions regarding this issue. We will mention, or the Shaykh has mentioned, 4 main opinions. The first is that it is ijma'. The first is opinion that it is ijma' because they've not spoken against it, and that shows that they agree. That shows they agree. And maybe you could say something like, when you have a virgin girl, if you ask her for marriage, when she remains quiet, that shows that she agrees. Similar to that, they've not said anything. Maybe they've thought that the other ulama have said it. I don't need to speak as well. Not every single person has to speak. Maybe they've thought something like that. So it's ijma'. It's ijma'. Point being is that they've said it is ijma' because they've not gone against it. It shows that they agree. The second opinion is that they say it's not ijma'. It's not considered ijma', but it's still a proof. It's not considered ijma', but it is still a proof. And this majority of the ulama say this. Many of the ulama, or if not the majority, they say that it is not ijma'. So it's not ijma', but it's a proof. And the difference is that ijma', once ijma' takes place, no one could go against it. But if it's a proof, then we can still look into it, and maybe you can go against it with other hadith and so on. But when ijma' clear cut, khalas. That's why some ulama have even placed ijma' higher in terms of strength, higher than the Quran and Sunnah. In terms of strength, not in terms of what the source is. It's because ijma' is, once they all agree, you can't go against it. And it's based on the Quran and Sunnah. Whereas if you have an ayah, then you have to look into it. Maybe it's mansukh, maybe there's a hadith explaining, or, like that. So then they have said it is a hujjah. The third opinion is that it's not ijma', nor even is it a proof. It is not ijma', nor is it a proof. And the reason for this is to say that the person is silent. Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe he's mutawaqqif. Maybe he doesn't know, so he doesn't want to give an answer. And if he doesn't know, that's not agreement. He's not agreeing to what everyone else has said. And another answer could be that he could be remaining silent for another reason. Okay, maybe he's remaining silent because of a political issue, that if he says something, he might get in trouble. And so, it could be other reasons that he remains silent. And the fourth opinion, this is the one that the Sheikh Rumaithiya has chosen, is that it's a bit detailed. We have to look into it, which is that now, if all of those mujtahidun now pass away and no one said anything, then it is a proof. Because now they've had a long period of time to, if they were confused, they've had time to look into it. If they weren't able to speak, they've had so long that, somehow they should be able to speak up. Okay? So if that is the case, then it is considered ijma'. Then it is considered ijma', because now it seems like what's apparent is that they've all agreed. So let's say they've all ijma' sukuti. Ulama have said something. Now 20 years later, or 30 years later, 30 years, no one said anything. No one said anything for 30 years. Right. What seems apparent is that they've agreed. If they disagreed through 30 years, somebody would have said something. Somebody would have said something. And that's the opinion that the Sheikh is leaning towards. Okay. Let me give an example of, a couple of examples of Ijma' al-Sukuti. Okay. One is that it is permissible for a slave to lead a free man in Salah. It is permissible for a slave to lead a free man in Salah. So there's a story of Abu Sa'id, who is not Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, Abu Sa'id, the freed slave of Abi Asid. Abu Sa'id, the freed slave of Abi Sa'id. He said that I got married when I was a slave, and then I called some of the Sahabah for food and so on, for dawat, and they answered me, and from them were Abu Dhar, Ibn Mas'ud, and Huzaifa radiallahu anhu. Abu Dhar, Ibn Mas'ud, and Huzaifa radiallahu anhu. And when the salah time took place, in his house, Abu Dhar went forward to lead. But then the other said, look behind you, because whoever's house you're in, okay, it should be the person's house you're in, they should lead. Even if others are more knowledgeable, as long as the person can recite and he can lead properly, who's given precedence? It's the person whose house it is. Obviously, if they want to put somebody else forward, then that's up to them. As long as they can recite properly, it's fine. They have the most right. So when the other said to him, behind you, pointing to this Abu Sa'id, he looked at Ibn Mas'ud and he said, is it like that? Oh, Abu Abdurrahman, is that the case? And Ibn Mas'ud said, na'am. So then they put him forward and he led the salah. That's an issue like this became widespread. Okay. And Ibn Qudama, he says, by the way, this narration is mentioned by Abdul Razak in Musannaf. Abdul Razak in his Musannaf. And inshallah, you know what that book is now. We took it in the Hadith Dawrah. Ibn Qudama comments and he says, and an issue like this spreads. There's a slave who's led Huzaifa, Ibn Mas'ud, and Abu Dhar radiallahu anhum in Salah. It's going to spread. وَلَمْ يُنْكِرْ وَلَا عُرِفْ مُخَالِفْ لِهَذَا فَكَانَ إِجْمَعٍ. And nobody rebuked it, and it's not known that anybody differed. فَكَانَ إِجْمَعٍ. So it is ijma'. So it is ijma' that it is permissible. So this is type of ijma' sukuti. Okay. Another type of ijma' sukuti is that when somebody passes away, the one who has the most right to lead the janazah salah, the one that has the most right to lead the jama'ah salah, is the one who the deceased willed for, or willed to lead salah. So if somebody's passed away and they said, I want this person to lead my janazah, then that person has the most right to lead that janazah. Ibn Qudama mentioned that the proof for this is the ijma' of the Sahaba. And then he mentioned that it's narrated in Abu Bakr that he gave wasiyah to Umar to lead his, and Umar gave wasiyah that Suhaib lead his, and Salama gave wasiyah that Sa'id ibn Zayd lead his, and Abu Bakr gave wasiyah that Abu Barza should lead his, and he carried on mentioning. So I'll just repeat the ones I mentioned. Abu Bakr gave wasiyah that Umar should lead his. Umar said Suhaib should lead his. Salama said Sa'id ibn Zayd should lead his, and then he carried on mentioning others. And he says, these type of issues are going to spread, especially with Abu Bakr and Umar being the Khalifas. Everyone's going to know who's leading. So he says, فَلَمْ يُظْهَرْ لَهَا مَخَالِفْ فَكَانَ إِجْمَاعًا. No, it's not apparent that anybody differed, so it is ijma'. And just one last point we need to mention regarding ijma' sukuti is that when you talk about ijma' sukuti, that Ijma' Sukuti should take place in an issue which either becomes really widespread or it takes place over time. In an issue which is really widespread or it takes place over time. Because if it's an issue which is a very small issue, just a few people, then there's ihtimal, then there's a possibility that not many people know about it. Okay, so how can all the mujtahidun agree upon it? But if it's something that's widespread, like if Abu Bakr did something or Umar said something, they're the Khalifas, so it's going to spread. Or if it's taking place over a couple of centuries, then that shows that yes, all the mujtahidun knew about it and they had a lot of time to say something. So that's something important, that Ijma' Sukuti is in those issues which either is very widespread or has taken place for a long time. And with that, alhamdulillah, we've come to the conclusion of the chapter of Ijma'. We'll take a quick 5-minute break and be very strict on time. At 59, we will restart at 59, and we will start with Al-Qiyas. And Al-Qiyas, I might have to go a bit faster because, subhanAllah, I wanted to take the chapter after it as well, but minimum Qiyas, we have to take at least Qiyas, inshallah. I will take a break for 5 minutes and we'll continue at 59, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad.
Exactly.
Naam, is everyone back? Shall we start? The next chapter is Al-Qiyas. So after the author finished talking about the Kitab and the Sunnah and the Ijma', he's now moved on to the fourth dalil, which is agreed upon, which is Al-Qiyas. And this is from the most important chapters of Usool al-Fiqh, because when you have new rulings, we need to know the ruling of it. How do we get to that ruling? Through Al-Qiyas. Through Al-Qiyas. So the author, he says the definition, analogy linguistically means the appreciation and quality. And technically it means drawing a similarity between a subsidiary issue and a core issue in a ruling that pertains to a common element between them. So, qiyas in simple terms, we have a ruling already established from the Quran and Sunnah. We got a new thing, we need to know the ruling. We work out what's the reasoning, this is haram or this is halal, whatever the ruling may be. And if that reasoning is also found in here, we give it the same ruling. Famous example, alcohol has been haram. We will find out a certain drug or certain, something else similar to that. The reason is that the reason alcohol is haram is because it intoxicates. Is it found here? Yes, it is. It takes the same ruling. Alcohol is haram. This is also haram. Okay, we'll give more examples shortly, inshallah. The Shaykh, he gave his definition and he said, Taswiyatu far'in bi asl. Drawing a similarity between a subsidiary issue, which means far', the word far', a branch, literally means branch, i.e. the new issue, and a core issue, and that's called asl. That's called asl, i.e. the original ruling, original issue. And if you remember when we talked about in the introduction of Usool al-Fiqh, we mentioned asl has a number of meanings, and we said there's one meaning that comes in qiyas. This is the meaning here. That's asl. And then we have in a ruling. So why are we making them the same? Because in the ruling, we're giving it the same ruling that pertains to a common element between them. And that's known as illatun jami'ah. It is called illatun jami'ah. Now, if you can see here in the definition, there are four main words or four main things. Obviously in the English, it's expanded a bit more. But there are four main things needed in this definition. And these are known as the four pillars of qiyas. Somebody asks you, what are the pillars of qiyas? Then the answer is that there are four pillars. The first is the asl, the original rule, the original issue, the core issue. The second is the ruling. The second is the ruling. The third is a illatun jami'ah, which is the common element. The common element. And the fourth is the far', which is the branch ruling, the new ruling, the subsidiary issue. So we have asl, hukum, far', illah, and far'. The original ruling, the original issue, the ruling, the common element, and fourthly, the new ruling. Whenever you see any issue in qiyas, these four pillars have to be there. That's what I mean pillars, meaning there can't be qiyas without these four. And it's important to highlight them whenever you're doing qiyas to make sure that the qiyas that you're doing is correct. And each of these four, when you get to the bigger books, the ulama go into each one and go into rulings of each one. We won't do that. But these four should be there. So let me give you another example, right? Let me give you another example. Alcohol is like a famous example. So let me give a different example. The Prophet ﷺ, he says in a hadith, إن الله ورسوله حرم بيع الخمر والميتة والخنزير والأصنام. Verily Allah and His Messenger have prohibited or made haram, made haram the selling of alcohol, of dead animals, al-maytah. That requires more explanation, but that's fine. Just put the word maytah, I think is better because dead animals needs a bit more explanation. Wal khinzir, pig. And lastly, al-asnam, idols. Allah's Messenger have made haram the selling of alcohol, maytah, pig, and idols. Now, the word which I want to focus on is idols. Okay. The reasoning why idols has been made haram is because it corrupts a person's religion. Because if he buys and sells idols, then he's going to end up worshipping, or somebody else is going to end up worshipping, and so on. So it's going to corrupt a person's religion. So that's the reasoning it's been made haram. So we can do qiyas of this upon the cross, the Christian cross. We can say it is also haram to sell, because there's no particular hadith for it. So you can also say that buying and selling the Christian cross is also haram, because the common element, which is destroying or harming your religion, is also present. So selling the cross is also haram. In this example, let's go through the pillars. What is the asl, the original issue?
Haram? No.
That's the hukm, that's the ruling. The asl, the original issue, not ruling, the original issue, the original thing which has been established by Quran and Sunnah. What are we doing qiyas upon? The cross upon what?
Upon the asnam, idols.
Upon the idols, yes. Okay, that's the part we need to focus on. Upon the idols. Good. So that is the asl. The asl in this hadith is the idols. What is the far'? What is the new issue that we're looking at? People have put in the chat.
Anything which corrupts, yani, or like.
Yeah, you can say anything across, but in this scenario, in this example, what is the new thing that what we're trying to work out? The ruling for what? The new issue is the cross.
Cross, yes.
That's the far'. That's the new issue. What is the ruling?
Haram.
It's haram. Okay. And what is the illa jami'a, the common element?
That both corrupts the belief.
Both can corrupt the belief in a person's religion and so on. So as you can see, it's affecting the deen. However you want to word it. In Arabic, they say ifsad lid-deen. So as you can see, all four pillars are present. The asl, the original ruling, and try to get used to the Arabic words. Usool al-fiqh, you need to know the Arabic words. We talked about this before. I do try to translate when I can, but it's sometimes a bit difficult. The asl, the original thing that we are looking at, is that in this hadith we're not focusing on the khamar or mayt and khizr too much. We're focusing on the asnam for this particular scenario. So the asl is the asnam, the idols. The far', the new ruling that the new issue that we are trying to get a ruling for is the cross. The ruling is haram. In Allah haram. Allah has made haram. Allah and His Messenger has made haram. And illa jami'a, the common element, is that it destroys a person's religion. Okay. After this, the Shaykh, okay, he carries on and he explains the definition. We can move past that for now. The Shaykh, he moves on to mention what are the proofs for Ijma'. What are the proofs for Ijma'? And there are many. The Shaykh mentions three types of proofs, i.e. firstly from the Quran, and then from the Sunnah, and then from the statements of the Sahabah. The first is the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahu alladhi anzala al-kitaba bil-haqqi wal-mizan wa ma yudrika la'alla as-sa'ata qarib. Qiyas, the proofs for Qiyas now, proofs of Qiyas. This ayah, Allah says, it is Allah who has sent down the book in truth and also the balance. And the balance, see, English translation won't really fully understand, but the word mizan, the ulama have explained that mizan is what is used to weigh up affairs and make analogy between them. So Allah is saying that we have sent down the Quran with the truth and also as a balance for you to use for other reasons, for other issues, and to give it the correct ruling. That's like the understanding of the ayah. That is the understanding of the ayah. Then the Shaykh mentions another ayah. He says, كَمَا بَدَأْنَا أَوَّلَ خَلْقٍ نُعِيدُهُ. Allah, just as we began the first creation, we will repeat it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using qiyas. Okay, and this is regarding the ayahs regarding resurrection. Allah is saying, just as we've done we created you in the beginning, likewise you can create you the second time. In fact, the second time is easier. Doing something the first time is harder. Okay, so Allah is doing qiyas upon the new issue, which is resurrection, and the ruling that is possible because He has already done it once, so He can do it again. So that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using qiyas. And likewise, in this ayah here, and it is Allah who sends the wind and they stir the clouds and we drive them to a dead land and give life thereby to the earth after its lifelessness. In this ayah, Allah is saying that if we have crops, plants and so on, that they die, Allah sends rain and the wind and so on, and they come back to life. That's something seen that crops can die, and if they looked after correctly, then they can come back to life. So Allah is saying, if that can happen with plants, then I can do that with you as well. We give life, we resurrected the plants, we can also resurrect you. Qiyas. Okay. So in this verse, Allah likened the return of the creation with its beginning and likened the revival of the dead with the revival of the earth, and this itself is qiyas. This itself is qiyas. As for the sunnah, there's two hadith. The evidence of the sunnah, the saying of the Prophet ﷺ to the woman who asked about making up the fast for her mother after she had died. What do you think if your mother was in a debt and you settled it for her? Would that then not be lifted from her? She said, yes. So she said, then fast for your mother. This woman came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, my mother's got some fasts that she needs to make up. She passed away. Can I fast on her behalf? The Prophet said, if you had a loan, if your mother had a loan, would you pay that loan off on her behalf? She said, yes. Okay, likewise, you can make up her fast. Because that's like a loan to Allah, you could say, a debt with Allah. So the Prophet did qiyas upon this new issue, upon the previous issue, or upon the issue of paying a debt. And likewise, the Prophet did it here with these animals. A man came to the Prophet and said, O Messenger of Allah, a black child has been born to me. The Prophet asked him, have you got camels? The man said, a black child. That's very important. A black child is very important. A black child has been born to me. The Prophet ﷺ asked him, have you got camels? The man said, yes. The Prophet ﷺ asked him, what color are they? The man said, red. The Prophet ﷺ said, is there a grey one amongst them? The man said, yes. The Prophet ﷺ said, where did it come from? He said, maybe it's from the heritage, meaning from DNA from the grandfather or before them. Maybe it was one of them that was a different color that caused it to be a different color. So the Prophet said, maybe your newborn has the same issue. Maybe your newborn has the same issue. So the Prophet used qiyas on animals upon this child. Thus, all the examples that are contained in the Quran and Sunnah are evidences of analogy because they give due consideration to things that are similar. So whenever an example is given, you could argue that that is also a type of qiyas. And some ulama have counted and said that there are over 40 examples in the Quran that can be used for qiyas. Over 40 that can be used for qiyas. And then from the statements of the companions, is what is related about the leader of the believers, Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, in his letter to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. It's a very famous letter that the ulama have accepted. We're going to read the statement of Ibn Qayyim. Anyways, Umar wrote to Abu Musa, with regards to judgments, he said, as for your understanding properly what comes to you from those issues that are not in the Quran, not in the Sunnah, then make analogy of the affairs that are with you and know the examples, then rely on what you hold to be the most beloved to Allah and the most resembling of the truth. Ibn Qayyim said, this magnificent letter has been received by the scholars with acceptance. Al-Muzani, and this may be put as a fourth type, but Al-Muzani has mentioned that the scholars from the era of the companions to this day agreed. So you can say this, Ijuma, that what resembles the truth is the truth, and likewise what resembles falsehood is falsehood, and so they use the standards of qiyas in fiqh for all the rulings. So these are proofs to prove that qiyas is a proof. These are proofs to prove that qiyas is a proof. Now we move on to the conditions of qiyas. Move on to the conditions of qiyas, and the conditions of qiyas, the Shaykh is going to mention five. From the condition of analogy is that, number one, it does not conflict with evidence that is stronger than itself. So there is to be no consideration for analogy, a qiyas, that conflicts with a text or consensus or the statements of the companions. So we say the statements of companions are an evidence. We took this. Remember we said the aqwal al-Sahaba is an evidence as long as it doesn't go against Quran and Sunnah. So the Shaykh, because that's an evidence, qiyas can't go against the statements of companions as well. The statements of companions are an evidence, and analogy that is in conflict with what has been mentioned is regarded as a corrupt analogy. It's called fasid al-i'tibar. Fasid al-i'tibar basically means an incorrect type of qiyas. So the first condition is basically qiyas cannot go against Quran or Sunnah or the statements of the companions. Meaning if you've taken a hadith, you got an issue, and from a hadith or an ayah, you've taken some sort of qiyas again to an issue, but this qiyas of yours, whatever you've based it upon, it goes against a clear ayah, which specifically talking about this issue, or a hadith, or a statement of Sahabi. Khalas, we don't look at your qiyas. We take the statement of Sahabi, or the hadith, or the ayah. And there's a number. What's the proof for this? Firstly, the actions of Sahaba themselves. The Sahaba would never go to qiyas until they couldn't find a dalil. They would always ask each other, do you know a hadith regarding this, or an ayah regarding this? And only when they couldn't, that's when they would go to qiyas. So they would make sure that they would not go against the qiyas. And the second is logic as well, because the objective of qiyas is to reach a ruling which is in line and corresponds with the teachings of the Quran and Sunnah. The objective of qiyas is to reach a ruling for a new issue which is in line and corresponds with the Quran and Sunnah. And if you are going against that, then you're not in line with the Quran and Sunnah. And a nice point to also mention is that Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, he has a very famous book. It's quite difficult. I've got it here somewhere. Yes, it's over there. It's that book over there. You can't see it. It's called I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in, and it's in 6 volumes. You get Dar ibn al-Jawzi, 6 volumes, and it's a very high-level book. And there's a lot of things in here where he goes into a lot of depth regarding issues of Usool al-Fiqh and so on. In here, it's called I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in. I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in. In there, he mentions 43 proofs to prove that qiyas cannot go against a saying of Sahabi. The qiyas cannot go against a statement of a Sahabi. And previously, when I mentioned the other statement of the ulama have found more than 40 examples in the Quran which apply to qiyas. Again, one of the references for that is I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in also. Okay, so let me give an example. Let's give an example. What do you mean cannot go against qiyas? So for example, now I'm saying Hanafi, and this is not an attack against Hanafi or anything like that. It's just this is their opinion, and just for your understanding. And a proof that the Hanafis do bring, that prove, according to them, it is permissible for a woman to marry without a wali. Okay? Because they do qiyas upon it is permissible for her to do buying and selling transactions without a wali. Because she can do these transactions without a wali, nikah is a sort of transaction also. Yeah? It's a sort of transaction. So because she can do that without a wali, likewise she can get married without a wali. She doesn't need a wali to get married. This is one of the proofs of the Hanafis for this issue. For the issue that it's not a condition to have a wali. They do qiyas of the qiyas of a woman who's baligh, who is Rashida, meaning she knows how to buy and sell, that because it is permissible for her to buy and sell in transactions, it's permissible for her to do it in also in nikah. But we answer, we say, no, that is not correct type of qiyas. Because you're going against the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, La nikaha illa bi wali. There is no nikah, i.e. there is no correct nikah except with a wali. Except with a wali. And this hadith is authenticated by more than one scholar, more than one muhaddith. So because they are going against a clear hadith, we say that this type of qiyas is fasid al-i'tibar, i.e. incorrect or invalid, or as it translated here, a corrupt analogy. A corrupt analogy. And this is the example that the Shaykh said. An example of that is if it was said it is correct for a good woman to marry by herself without a guardian, making analogy with the fact that it is okay for a woman to sell something with her own money by herself without the need of a guardian. This qiyas is corrupt because it conflicts directly with the text, the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, there is no marriage without a wali. Okay. Another example, we can give an example of a statement of a Sahabi, for example. Another statement of the Hanafis is that they say it is not permissible for a man to wash the body of his wife. Okay, if his wife passes away, it's not permissible for him to wash her body, doing qiyas upon a ajnabiyah, a woman who is not her mahram, or a woman who is not related to him, other than his wife and his sisters and mothers and so on, ajnabiyah. So just as it was not allowed for him to wash that body and touch that body, they do qiyas. She's a woman, plus your wife's a woman, so they do qiyas like that, and they say it's not permissible for you to do so. Okay, so they say it is not permissible for a man to wash his wife, doing qiyas upon it's not allowed for him to wash any other woman. Okay, we answer that this goes against what the Sahaba have done, because it has been narrated that Ali radiallahu anhu washed Fatima radiallahu anha. Ali radiallahu anhu washed Fatima radiallahu anha, and it's something which became widespread, and nobody disputed this. So one could even argue that it's a type of ijma' sukuti. One could even argue that, but even without going to that extent, something Ali radiallahu anhu did. Issue of bathing is different. We're talking about washing. Okay, like I said, it's not a fiqh lesson. We don't want to go into all of the fiqh issues. Okay, that's the first condition. The second condition is the ruling be based on asl, primary issue that has been established by text or consensus. What this basically means is that when you have a qiyas, then the asl that we're looking at, the asl. Now you should know what the asl means. The asl has to be established by Quran, Sunnah, or Ijma'. By Quran, Sunnah, or Ijma'. Like we have alcohol, established by Quran and Sunnah. We had all these other examples. The asl has to be established by the Quran and Sunnah. Okay. What this basically means is that we can't do qiyas upon qiyas. We can't do qiyas upon qiyas. So, for example, if you take the first example of the cross, the asl is what? The asl is the idols, right? And then the fara' is a cross. We don't say, let's say you had another religious symbol or statue or something like that of a different religion. We won't say that is haram because we do qiyas upon the cross. La. You do qiyas upon, you go back to the original. You go back to the original. You do qiyas upon the idol, not upon the cross. Not upon the cross. And the reason for that, firstly, is because doing that is making the issue longer without a need. It's making the issue longer without a need. Because if you keep doing qiyas, it makes it longer, not even just in saying it, but now you have to establish all of these are correct as well. And secondly, it's more correct to take it back to the asl, because with each far' there might be slight differences, slight different, and the meaning might be lost and so on. So the asl that we are talking about should be established by Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma'. Now, Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma'. So he says established by text. Text means Quran and Sunnah, or consensus, i.e. Ijma'. Now, I'll give you an example. When having a shower, a ghusl, you need a niyyah, you need an intention. Okay, what's the proof for this? It's not allowed for a person to say, oh, because we do qiyas upon wudu, because in wudu you need intention. No, because there's no clear ayah. For qiyas, for wudu, what's the proof that we have to have intention in wudu? It's all of the general ahadith regarding innama bin-niyat and so on, or it's qiyas upon tayammum. It's qiyas upon tayammum. Tayammum has been established by ijma'. By ijma', you have to have niyyah in tayammum. As for wudu, the Hanafis differ, so there's no ijma'. So in here, would you say ghusl, the niyyah being established for ghusl is established and qiyas is done upon wudu or upon tayammum? Which one would you say?
Tayammum.
You would say tayammum. And if somebody was to say wudu, we would say that is an incorrect ijma'. Now, okay, just for time, we're just going to jump to the third condition. You could read the rest yourself. The third is the cause of a ruling or primary issue must be known, so that the comparison of the subsidiary, either new and primary, the asl, the fara and asl, issues can be made. If, however, the primary issue is specifically one of mere worship to Allah, then the analogy is not correct. This basically says that the illah, the common issue, okay, the illah jami'ah. Illah means reasoning, jami'ah means it's common in both. This has to be something which is known. This has to be something which is known. And the Shaykh said, if it's something of worship, then we can't use it. Meaning, why is Dhuhr 4 raka'at? We don't know. That's mere worship. Yeah, that's mere worship. Meaning, there's no reasoning that we know. There might be a reasoning with Allah, but we don't know reasoning. It's not something which is known to us. So we can't do qiyas on other salah that this should be 4 qiyas because Dhuhr is 4. La. This is not something which is understood. Whereas something which is understood is like the idols, because it destroys the religion. Alcohol, because it destroys your intellect, and then it also leads to a person, maybe damaging other property and so on. So it has to be something which is known. That is regarding number 3. Number 4. I'm gonna go a bit quicker now because of time. Number 4 is that now this reasoning which is known, it has to be something which is, it says the mutual reasoning has to be a suitable meaning. So, meaning we say this is the reason, but this reason has to be something which is suitable, something which is firstly mundabit, meaning something which we can easily measure and so on. Okay, and also it means that it's something which actually has an effect. It actually has an effect. So the Sheikh says, such as the legislation of intoxication of alcohol. Intoxication is suitable meaning. We can tell when somebody's, what things intoxicates a person, one doesn't. Okay, and it's something suitable because later on it causes people to do things which are immoral and so on, right? However, the Sheikh says, he gives examples here, the ones which are not suitable, such as black or white, or the color of something. A person's black, a person's white. Okay, that's not suitable. That's got nothing to do with this issue. And sometimes in certain issues also be male and female. The asl is that male and females have the same rulings. A male has to pray 5 times. A female has to also pray 5 times. There's no difference. Okay, except certain rulings, then you'll have to prove that the issue is the gender. You'll have to prove that. And then Sheikh, he mentions an issue, and he mentions the black, that saying that it doesn't matter if the person was black or not. And then the 5th condition, and by the way, if a illah is mentioned, a reasoning is mentioned, and it's not suitable, it's called tardi. It's called wasfun tardiyun. Wasfun tardi, meaning a description which is not effective and not suitable. That's for those that want to know the Arabic terminology. The 5th condition, that a common cause be present in the secondary matter. So we've got the illah, it's known, it's suitable. Okay, now we have to make sure that it's in the new issue that we're talking about. You can't just get all excited and everything, and then it's not even there in the second issue, right? So we can give an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says regarding your parents, فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ. Don't even say uff to them. Why? Because it's harming them and it's disrespectful to them. Right? What about hitting them? Obviously, if you can't say uff to them, obviously hitting the illah is found. The illah jami'ah is present. So that is correct. That is correct. But some issues, okay, some of the examples I've got are to do with makil and mawzoon and a bit of transactions, which would require a bit of time to explain. But because we don't have time, I'm not going to mention it. It's just read, maybe if it's clear, then it's fine. For example, if it is said that the cause in the prohibition of usury is in the fact that it can be weighed, and then it is said that usury also occurs with apples out of the analogy of wheat. As for this analogy, then it is not correct. The reason being is that the cause is not present in the secondary matter as apples are not weighed. Okay. Like I said, those that especially have not studied riba and transactions, you won't really understand. But one of the reasons wheat has been made haram, there's khilaf, but the Hanabila and others have said, is because it is weighed. Apples, when they are sold, at the time for some, they weren't weighed. They were counted, 1 apple, 2, that's how they were. So we can't say apples are not allowed because they are weighed, because at the time for some, that's not how it was. So the reasoning is not there. Like I said, if you've not studied riba and transactions, you won't fully understand this issue. Don't worry about it. The point being is that you have to make sure that that reason is actually there. Okay, right. Categories of qiyas, the different types of qiyas. This is the splitting qiyas in terms of its strength. Again, 2 types: jali and khafi. The first is jali, which is clear. Jali means clear. That here, what is qiyas al-jali? What has had its cause proved through a text or consensus, or is maqdur', statement that stops a that is a incorrect translation, subhanAllah. Firstly, maqtu' is a statement of tabi'i, mawquf would be companion, but that is not what is intended here. That's an incorrect translation. And may Allah reward the translator for his efforts and forgive him for any mistakes which is from himself or shaitan. But this is incorrect translation. The actual Arabic says, أو قطع فيه بنفي الفارق. قطع فيه بنفي الفارق is where the difference between the primary and secondary source is negated. That is correct. As for the brackets is not needed. What this basically means is that the illah that we have, that's something clearly mentioned in the Quran or Sunnah, or it is by ijma' that this is the reason. Okay, or it's maqtu' means when you look at the issue, there's no other possibility whatsoever. There's no other possibility. Okay, so that is something which is clear cut, and then you can apply it to others. Okay, so for example, the Sheikh here, an example of that which has been proved with a text is the analogy of the prohibition of dry, unclean blood, use of purification after relieving oneself, with that of the prohibition of using dry dung. In the hadith, person said, don't use that because it is najis. And then the Sheikh gave this example, or any other example of anything else which is najis, impure, we can't use it to clean ourselves in the bathroom. Why? Because it is najis. Right. The Islam clearly mentioned the reason that you can't use this because it is najis. Therefore, anything else which is najis, you can't use. This is qiyas al-jali, clear. Like, no one's going to turn around and say the reason is something else. And then an example of that which has been proven through consensus by ijma', person forbade an angry judge from making judgment. Person said when a judge is given a ruling, he shouldn't do it when he is angry. Well, okay, the reasoning is because obviously it's going to affect his thinking. So likewise, anyone who is suffering from constipation, okay, and so on, the actual Arabic word is haqin. Haqin with a noon is a person who is stopping urine. And then another word which is not mentioned in the text, I don't believe. Is it mentioned in the text? No, the Sheikh doesn't mention it, but another word which is also mentioned, haqib, with a ba, is somebody who is stopping feces from coming out. So haqin is the urine, and haqib is the other. Ala kulli hal, if somebody's in that state, then we say it's not allowed for that judge to give that ruling because his mind is busy with wanting to go to the bathroom. So this reasoning that it has an effect on a person's judgment, that's by ijma'. That is by ijma'. So that's what the Shaykh basically means that's what we mean by qiyas al-jali. We move on to qiyas al-khafi. This is hidden. Hidden doesn't necessarily mean that if no one knows, but what it means is that what has the cause proven through careful devising, but the difference between the primary and secondary issue is not clearly negated. Meaning, we have to look into it, and sometimes there can be khilaf, is this the reasoning, and so on. If that is the case, then that's called qiyasu al-khafi. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but in terms of how strong it is, it's not as strong as qiyasu al-jali. Now you have to look into it, you have to argue a bit more, bring more proofs, and so on. Okay, that's what qiyas al-khafi is referring to. Now the Shaykh is going to mention a different type of analogy. It's called qiyasu al-shabah. Qiyasu al-shabah. So alif lam and sheen ba ha. Qiyasu al-shabah. The qiyas of similarities. This is a type of qiyas known as qiyas al-shabah, the analogy of likeness, which is when a secondary matter is between two primary matters due to it having similarities with both, but it is aligned with one which it has most in common with. Basically, you have a new ruling, a fara', right? And you're trying to do qiyas. However, you don't do qiyas upon one hadith or one ayah. But in reality, there are two issues. It's similar to this issue, and it's also similar to this issue. Right? Which one? Okay? Which ruling do you give? Which ruling do you give it? And what the Shaykh said is that you give it the ruling of that which is closer to. So it's more closer depending on the scenario, or if there are more descriptions and factors that match with a certain one. More, so let's say in 3 factors it matches this one, and only one it matches the other, we give it this ruling, and so on. This is one definition of qiyas al-shabah. There's another definition the Shaykh hasn't mentioned, but I'm not going to give it. I'm not going to mention it. But let's give an example. The example of a slave. Is he owned like a property, making analogy with a free person? Or is he not owned like an animal? Right, the Shaykh is doing it the other way around. Is he not owned? What's the other? هل يملك, or does he own? Does he own بالتمليك, like owning a property, making an analogy of a free person? Or لا يملك, or does he not own like an animal? Basically, we have a slave. Okay, is he able to own money? Is he able to own money? That's the issue. Okay, and we have 2 issues. Either he's like a free person, or he's like an animal. When you say animal, not in a disrespectful way, but I'll explain what it means. It's like a free person because he's a human, right? He can do nikah and everything, right? But he's like an animal in the sense that an animal is owned, and the animal can be bought and sold. Likewise, a slave, right? Which of the 2 is it closer to? And the ulama say that, well, they differ. The ulama differ, right? But one answer that I can give you is that ulama say that because we are talking about him owning something, in this scenario, he's actually more closer to an animal, because an animal is owned. He himself is owned. So how can he own? We don't say that this animal owns this, and that. Okay, so in that scenario, he's more like an animal. Why is this mentioned? It's not a disrespect to a slave or to a person. It's because of what comes later. For example, zakah. Does he have to give zakah? Let's say he does have, there's money. Now, zakah. If he owns that money, he has to give that zakah. If he does not own that money, then his master has to give the zakah. So you can see the effects of this issue. But the point being is that which ruling do we give? Because it's not clear hadith, so we have to use qiyas. That's what, and the Shaykh explains this issue. So this is what qiyas al-shabah is. Are there any other important issues? The last line, the Shaykh says that this type of analogy is weak for the fact that there isn't a suitable common cause between them, other than he resembles an animal in most rulings, although it is disputed by another primary ruling. So this is like a very weak type of qiyas. It's a weak type of qiyas. It's not jali, it's not khafi, it's weaker than that. So you'd only go to it if you can't find anything else. Okay. And then the last one is we have qiyasu al-aks, the opposite type of qiyas. Qiyasu al-aks. Qiyasu al-aks. Qiyasu al-aks is basically, it is to affirm the opposite of a ruling of a primary issue of the asl for the secondary issue due to the presence of the opposite cause in the primary ruling. This means the asl has a certain ruling and it has an illah. It has a common issue. But the new ruling, the far', we give it the opposite ruling. We don't give it the same now. We give it the opposite ruling because it has opposite of the common issue. It's the opposite, exact opposite of that common issue. And this is mentioned in the hadith. This is taken on the hadith for Islam. So when the hadith, I think it's hadith number 25 from Arba'in Nawiyah, which is also in Sahih Muslim. Okay. And Prophet said, in using a private part is a type of charity. They said, O Messenger of Allah, one of us fulfills his desires and he is then rewarded. He said, do you see that if he does not, that he does it in a forbidden way, that he will be punished for it? So if he does it in the right way, he'll be rewarded. So the Prophet ﷺ, in this, the asl is what? Having relationship or intercourse in a haram way. Having intercourse in the haram way. Okay? And the ruling is that it is a sin. Okay, the ruling is that it is a sin because it's haram. Right. So the opposite, if you do halal, then you get rewarded because it is halal. Okay, so it's not haram, it's opposite, which is halal, so you get reward. So instead of getting sin, you get reward. Instead of gaining sin, you get reward. I'll give you another example, which is not mentioned. Is the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا ينصرف حتى يسمع صوتا أو يجد ريحة. When a person is praying and he has certainty that he has done wudu. A person is praying, you have certainty you've done wudu. You just come to salah, you've done your wudu. But now you have shak, you have doubt, have you broken that wudu or not? You have doubt, have you broken that wudu? You feel like maybe some wind has passed or whatever the case may be, but you're not 100% sure. The Prophet said, لا ينصرف حتى يسمع صوتا أو يجد ريحة. This person should not leave until he hears the noise or he smells something. Okay? So he smells something. So that is if you are certain that you have wudu, but now you are doubtful, have you broken it? Prophet said, you shouldn't unless you smell or hear something. Okay, what about the opposite? The opposite, a person who 100% knows that he's broken his wudu. He knows that he's gone to the bathroom, but now he has doubt. Did he do wudu after that or not? Did he do wudu or not? This is the opposite scenario of the first, right? So we give it the opposite ruling. The first scenario, the ruling was that he has wudu. This is the opposite scenario, so we give it the opposite ruling. He does not have wudu. He does not have wudu. So a person knows that he does not have wudu, then he has doubt, has he done wudu or not? Then we could say that, we say that you do not have wudu. Why? Qiyas upon this hadith. Or qiyas al-aqs. What type of qiyas? Qiyas al-aqs. The opposite type of qiyas. And with that, we finished the chapter of qiyas now. I know the time is finished. We did actually start, I think, 10 minutes late anyway. Only because of time, and we only have one more lesson left. We're going to carry on, inshallah. I know it's going to get a little bit late, but we have to, otherwise we won't be able to finish. So we'll take another 15-20 minutes. I will give you a 2-minute break right now. I'll give you a 2-minute break, quick stretch, quick refill your water, tea, I don't mind. Quick 2-minute break to get your thoughts together, and then we'll continue for another 15 minutes. And please forgive me for going over the time. This is a lesson for myself that this book requires a lot more time. Initially I did say 3 days, but we only had the 2 days, so we said we'll try to finish it quick. But then as we were teaching, we realized, especially because I think most of you have never studied Usool fiqh before, it does require a lot more explanation, even though I am trying to still go fast and missing parts out. But inshallah, we really do want to finish this book. Let's take a 2-minute break, inshallah, and then we'll continue. We'll take 15 minutes and we'll finish at, I think for you guys it'll be 11 o'clock. I don't want to go past 11 because then I don't think it's fair for those who have work. No. If did wudu and he get doubt, then he consider wudu, yes. If you've done wudu, then you have doubt, meaning you don't know. You have wudu. Unless you have certainty that you've broken your wudu, and the person explained that, he said, unless you hear something or you smell something. Okay, now 45 will continue. Um, now, inshallah, everyone's back. I know it wasn't the longest break, but at least you stretched or something. Now, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ta'arud, contradiction. Now, this chapter is regarding contradiction. Now, we kept indicating towards this chapter saying that if there's khilaf, what do we do and so on. And we're going to talk about this now. Now, after the author has talked about the agreed upon proofs to Quran, Sunnah, Ijma and Qiyas, now he's going to talk about, okay, if they differ with one another, what do you do? How do we solve that issue? Now, because your dalil cannot be fully 100% correct if there's something on the opposite side going against it, right? And types, ta'arud is of many different types. Sometimes if there's between two even texts, then before you even look at the wording, you have to look at the sanad, for example, and which is authentic or which is inauthentic, or sometimes which has been narrated more, which is narrated less, and there's a lot of ways like that. And then also when you look at different texts, depending on your usul fiqh principles, so if there's two contradictory hadith, maybe one madhab will take a certain opinion because of the usul fiqh principle, but the other will take another because of their usul fiqh principle. So that's how they do their ta'arud. They combine between two and so on. So there are different ways of doing ta'arud, but the Shaykh just focuses on a few of them. And he focuses on ta'arud between those proofs from the angle of al-'am wal-khas, from being 'am and khas. And this is one of the most important types of ta'arud. That's why he has mentioned it. So he's not mentioned all, because it's a beginner's book, but he has done it from the angle of al-'am wal-khas. So let's read what the Shaykh says. He says, at-ta'arud linguistically means to oppose one another, to prevent each other, and technically it means when two evidences oppose one another. It's important to add, I think, the word maybe apparently. Okay, i.e., to us it looks like they're contradicting, but in reality the religion has no contradiction. Allah says, وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. If it's from other than Allah, the Quran was from other than Allah, they would find many contradictions in there. So there's no contradictions in the religion, but it may look like contradiction to us due to our weak knowledge. And subhanAllah, you could probably appreciate, even studying a beginner's book in Usul al-Fiqh, how much, subhanAllah, you realize you don't know. So, just because we don't know, or a certain scholar doesn't know an answer, it doesn't mean that knowledge isn't there. It just means that we don't know it. So the Shaykh says, and the contradiction has 4 parts. He has mentioned 4 types. Okay, and these 4 types I mentioned to you right now is that either two texts are, both of these texts are general, both of them are 'am. Okay, then what do you do in that case? We're going to go through each of them. I'm just going to mention what the 4 are. First scenario, both are 'am. Both are 'am. The second, both are khas. Both are khas. The third is one is 'am and one is khas. One is 'am and one is khas. The fourth is that both of them are 'am, but one is more 'am than the other in one aspect, and the other is more 'am than the other in another aspect. We'll explain what that means when we get there. So the fourth is both of them are 'am, but one is more 'am in one aspect and the other is more 'am in another aspect. That would probably take tomorrow with a fresh mind, inshallah. So don't worry about that. So the first type is when the contradiction is between two general evidences, which is 4 cases, okay? 4 steps. We'll try to take this minimum. If you can take this minimum, it's very good, because this kind of gives a layout for the rest of the chapter. The rest of the chapter kind of follows a similar pattern. So it makes it a lot easier, inshallah. So he's in number 1, where they can be combined so that each one can take a state that does not contradict the other one. So in such a case, we must combine them. The first step that we do when 2 evidences are 'am, we try to combine them. We do jam' between them. That's the first thing that we do. We try to combine. And we try to combine in a way so that they're not contradicting one another. So let's, for example, and this ayah more of a maybe aqidah issue is mentioned, so you might be familiar with this if you've studied aqidah, is the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and indeed, O Muhammad, you guide to a straight path. And in the next ayah, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ, O Muhammad, you do not guide whom you love. Both of these are general. Okay. In one ayah, Allah is saying, O Muhammad, you guide. In general, you guide. And in the other, you don't guide. So, in simple terms. Am and khas, quick recap. Am, general. Khas, specific. Come on, I'm using the Arabic terms for a reason. Am is general. Khas is specific. So here we have two general evidences. The first, in this scenario, the first is, O Muhammad, you guide, generally, you guide. And the second, you do not guide. Very good. Hidayat tawfiq wal irshad. How do we combine them? We say that we combine them by saying there are two types of hidayah. There are two types of guidance. The first type of guidance is called hidayatu at-tawfiq. Hidayatu at-tawfiq. Which is well, in English it doesn't make sense, but the guidance of guidance. Or you can maybe say guidance of success. Tawfiq, another meaning could be success. What this basically means, I'll explain in simple terms, is hidayat al-tawfiq. Sorry. The first verse, this is irshad. Hidayat al-irshad. Hidayat al-irshad. So the first type is hidayat al-irshad, which is the guidance of showing somebody the straight path. So let me, let's not read. Let me just explain. It'll be easier. The first type of hidayah guidance is hidayatu al-irshad. Hidayatu al-irshad, which means the guidance of showing somebody the straight path. The second is hidayatu al-tawfiq. Al-tawfiq, the guidance of success. And this is, actually allowing a person to act upon guidance. Let me give you an example. You come to me for directions. I say to you, go straight, take a right, and take a left. I've guided you, showing you the path. I'm telling you what the path is. Okay. Whether you actually go and take that path, that's when the second type of hidayah comes in. Hidayatu at-tawfiq. Okay. So when you have these two types of hidayah, we say the first ayah is referring to hidayatu irshad, that the Prophet ﷺ, he shows people the straight path. He tells people what's the truth and what's falsehood. Whereas the second type of hidayah, that's hidayat tawfiq. As for you actually acting upon that guidance, okay, that's only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why in this ayah is actually referring to when the person's uncle passed away, and he passed away as a disbeliever. So Allah is saying to him, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. You can tell him all about the straight path, but him actually accepting Islam, that's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So inshallah, does that answer make sense? And the Shaykh explains the answer in English, but you can read that yourself. Hopefully, does that explanation make sense, inshallah? Hidayatu al-irshad is showing somebody the straight path. Hidayatu tawfiq is actually acting upon that guidance. Showing somebody the straight path, the person can do. Actually acting upon it, then that guidance is only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, so that's the first thing that we do. First thing is that we do jama', we combine between the two. Number two, if you cannot reconcile them, then the latter is abrogating if the history is known about it. So it is to be acted upon instead of the earlier one. The second issue is you do nasakh, we abrogate. You abrogate with the condition that you know the date, the timestamps. We talked about this. One of the most important conditions of nasakh. If you don't, then you go to the next one. But if you do know, then you can do nasakh. This example, both of them are general. Let me just quickly explain. The first ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the people a choice. He gives them a choice that in Ramadan, you can choose to fast or you can feed for poor people. You can choose to fast or you can feed poor people. And in the next ayah, Allah is saying you have to fast. Allah is saying whoever reaches a month, then he should fast. Okay, right? We can't do jama' because the first is saying you got a choice, and the second is saying you can only fast. What do? We know from another narration of Salama ibn from Salama radiallahu anh, that the first ayah that was mentioned actually came in the beginning of Islam, and the second ayah, or the beginning of the Medina period anyway, Salama ibn al-Akwa', that's his name now. And the second came later. So it shows that the second ruling, meaning everybody has to fast in Ramadan, it abrogates the previous ruling. And that shows us how Allah did, tadarruj in the rulings. Then in the beginning of Islam, Allah allowed the people to choose, and then later on Allah made it obligatory upon everyone. So the first ayah gave a choice, the second said you have to fast. From the statement of the Sahabi, we know that the choice came first and that the obligation of just fasting came second. So we say that the second is a nasikh and it abrogates the first one, which is a mansukh. The third is, if the history is not known, then the most likely opinion should be acted upon if there is one. If the history is unknown, then you do tarjih. To a hadith, for example, you can't do jama', we can't do naskh, okay? We have to choose one now, either this one or we choose this one. You have to do tarjih. And how do you do tarjih? You have to look at different types of murajjihat, different secondary issues, and you have to basically work out. And these are many different issues that the ulama talk about. We don't have time to mention, but now you have to work out which is stronger, which one do you act upon. A famous example: whoever touches his private parts, then let him make ablution. Whereas, compared with the other hadith where a man who touches his private part, does he have to make wudu? The Prophet said, no, it is a part of you. So one hadith, the Prophet saying, if you touch your private part, you have to do wudu. In the other, no, it's just a part of you. You can't do jama', you can't do naskh, then you have to give preference to one. The Sheikh says, so I know you might have questions regarding this, just please wait until I finish. So the first, meaning that it does break your private parts, it does break your wudu. So the first is given precedence because it is the more cautious. This is the first reason. It's more cautious, safer. More oft narrated, meaning the first one, more people have narrated it. That's more people have narrated it. The third is that it's more authentic. And the fourth, it is quoted from the source, so it contains an additional knowledge. In English, maybe not the best translation. What it means is that it goes against the asl. The asl is nothing breaks your wudu unless you have a dalil. So because whenever you have a new ruling, it's like we have new type of knowledge, something goes against the asl, many of the usuliyun show that we should take that because it goes against the asl. You could argue, is that a murajjih or not? Is that something that gives precedence to a ruling or not? That's a different issue, but the Shaykh mentioned these 4 reasons. So if according to the Shaykh's opinion, we can't combine, and we don't know the tariq, we don't know the history, the time, so we have to give preference to one, and he gave preference to the first one, that it does break your wudu because of these reasons. Now, in this particular issue, like we said, fiqhi issues are not mentioned to argue the fiqhi issue. Now, I know that there are other ulama, some have done naskh, some have tried to work it on the naskh, some have tried to do combine and said that, oh, this shows that it's mustahab to do wudu, not obligatory. Some have said the difference is that touching a private part with a veil, that doesn't break your wudu. But without a veil or without like clothing or something, that does break your wudu. There's many different opinions of the ulama, but we just want to understand the usuli principle and the application of it. So upon this opinion, those that say it does break your wudu, how did they get it? We know the usul fiqh process of it. One person asked, how can one hadith contradict another hadith like this one? So, like we said, there's no contradiction. It looks like contradiction for us. So these 2 hadiths were said in 2 different scenarios, 2 different incidents, 2 different moments. So maybe in that moment, what happened, for example, maybe the person touched it with the clothing, and the person said it didn't break your wudu. But because we may not know that, then that's where the issue comes. It could be for many reasons. Like I said, there is no contradiction, but we could maybe think of it like a contradiction because we don't know. Okay, but the only thing I need you to focus on right now is that the usuli principle, that if you don't know the history, then we have to give tarjih to one. And Shaykh give this example, even though there's a lot of khilaf in this example, but you can understand the issue of, okay, those that take the first opinion, why? They've done tarjih. They're given preference to one hadith over the other, and these are some of the reasons. It's more cautious, there's more people narrated it, it's more authentic, and it takes a person away from the asl, which many usuliyun say that's more knowledge we should act upon that. And then the last one, if there is no preferred opinion of the two, then both should not be acted upon, and no sound example can be found for this. Why can no sound example be found for this? Because there is no contradiction in the religion. Any contradiction is subjective. Any contradiction is subjective. And so even Uthman radiallahu anh, and many of the Sahaba and even others, in some issues they would say, I don't know, and they would stay quiet. So they would know. But then maybe another Sahabi would give an answer. So sometimes one scholar may not know, another scholar may know, so all of this is subjective. We'll stop here, inshallah. The main thing we've learned from here, if that two issues are am, then the first thing we do is jama', we combine. If we can't, then we do nasakh. If you can't do it, and that's with the condition that we know the date. If we don't know the date, then we do tarjih. We give preference to one. And if we can't do tarjih, we go to the fourth, which is at-tawaqquf, meaning saying we don't know and not coming to a conclusion. We'll continue from here tomorrow, inshallah. Not tomorrow, Wednesday, inshallah. And inshallah, we should be able to finish the book. On Wednesday, we should finish the book, inshallah. We've been taking approximately the book that I've got anyway, about 40 pages every lesson. And we have here about 40 pages left. So inshallah, we should finish it on Wednesday. Again, forgive me for going over the time, but it's only because I don't want to add an extra day and make it too long. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept it from us and to allow us to act upon the knowledge and to make it means of benefit. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Sheikh, if you have time, maybe we can ask if
anyone got questions, then they can ask.
Okay.
Anyone,
if anyone wants to leave, they can leave. But if anyone has any question, then they can just raise their hand and we can unmute them to ask the question, or they can type it on the chat, inshallah.
One brother wrote, we can stay late too. No, I don't think it's fair on everyone who's got job and everything. On Wednesday, we'll stay until you finish the book, inshallah. But it shouldn't be too late, inshallah.
Sheikh, someone has asked your fourth one.
Before the question, do you think it would be better if Wednesday we change the time to before Isha? Just so we don't finish too late. That way we can do a bit longer, but we don't finish late at night.
I'm not sure about the brothers. If I can maybe check with them, inshallah, I can let you know.
Yeah, it's an idea. If that's what we decide, then we can then make the announcement, inshallah. I'll also announce it in my groups and Instagram as well. Okay, now was a question?
The question is like the fourth one. The thing we see, if there is no preferred opinion, do we have any example for that?
Okay, so what did the Sheikh say? Okay, the Sheikh said, where is it gone? The Sheikh said, and no sound example can be found for this. No, because it's subjective. So if I give you an example, I might not know the answer, but another alim will come along and say, no, the answer is this. So for him, it'll go into the other categories. I can give you one. Okay, let's give one example if you want of Uthman radiallahu anhu. There's one ayah, Surah Nisa, ayah number 23. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ. That it's haram for you to marry two sisters at once. Okay. And then there's another ayah where it says, O ma malakat aymanukum, which basically gives permission to marry slaves, no matter what the case. It doesn't differentiate whether it's two sisters or not. Okay. So one ayah is saying that it's not allowed, and the other ayah, which is Surah Nisa ayah number 3, basically saying it's general, but for anyone that it's allowed. Uthman radiallahu anhu, he came along and he said, أحلتهما آية وحرمتهما أحلتهما آية وحرتهما آية. He said one ayah said it's halal and the other ayah says haram. So he stopped. He didn't give an answer in that. So for Uthman radiallahu anhu, that would be number 4. And then other ulama would turn around turn around and they would give answers, and they would say that no, this is talking about two. This is talking about, because the second ayah, the second ayah, Oma Malakat Aymanukum, is having two slave girls. Okay, so someone can turn around and say that no, this is talking about marriage. You can't marry two sisters, and they can give their answers and so on. The point being, like I said, there's no sound example. So for Uthman radiallahu anhu, it would be number 4. But for other ulama and so on, they would say no, there'd be answer. Or even other Sahaba, they would give an answer, and then it would either go to either number 3, which is tarjih, or it would go to number 2, which is naskh, or it would go to number 1, which is jama'. So number 4 is something which is subjective. No.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Sheikh, I wanted to ask a question on that silent ijma. Just want to know if ijma has been established, and it's such big number of ulama, which you just give an example of 100. Now, if someone who was silent on it and then come back later with a very stronger opinion, so will that ruling will be changed?
So that depends on we mentioned 4 opinions. We mentioned 4 opinions on regarding ijma' sukuti, is that dalil or not. Now, upon the opinion of the Sheikh, Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, his opinion, which is number 4 that we mentioned, was that if that happens, we should wait until all of the mujtahidun pass away. And then once they pass away, then the ijma' is established. So your question was that if somebody was to remain silent and then later on came, meaning he's still alive, he later on came and went against it, then obviously the ijma' is not, according to that opinion, that is not considered ijma'. According to other opinions that ijma' takes place straight away, for example, then according to that opinion, no. So that opinion, ijma' is taking place, and it doesn't matter if he goes against it later. So it all depends on exactly what opinion. But if you stick to Ibn Uthaymeen's rahimahullah, then in your scenario, if a person later on came and went against, then it's not ijma' because he hasn't passed away yet. Somebody asked, is ijma' possible nowadays? Now, majority of ulama, they say that now it's too hard for ijma' to take place. It's very, very hard for ijma' to take place. If they are differing, if it took place after the time of the Sahabah, what do you think about now? Some might argue that now because social media is easier, but to be honest, it's very, very difficult, because even though social media can gather so many ulama together, there's still so many ulama that you may not know of. So it's very, very difficult, inshallah.
Brother Nawaz, you can ask your question.
Nawaz.
Sheikh, regarding your explanation for analogy, regarding ulama of Hanaf, they say for ghusl for dead spouse. What dalil they give? It is not allowed, for saying it is not allowed to make ghusl for dead spouse.
Yeah, so they say it's not allowed. Qiyas a ajnabiya woman. So if you have a random woman who is not your wife, your mother, your daughter, is it allowed for you to touch her? It's not allowed for you to touch her. So women should be the one that wash her. Okay, women should wash a woman. But what about the husband? Is the husband allowed to wash his wife? So the Hanafi say no, because just like you're not allowed to wash an ajnabi woman, you're not allowed to wash your wife as well. That's their proof. Whether you agree with it or not, that's a different issue, but that's their qiyas. That just because it's not allowed, just as it's not allowed for a normal woman, that's the same ruling. A woman should be washed by a woman. It doesn't matter if it's your wife or not, it's your wife or it's not your wife. But then we say no, Ali radiallahu anhu washed Fatima radiallahu anha, so that shows that it's permissible. So we can't use that qiyas.
I think, Sheikh, maybe I'm wrong. I heard they give the rationality logic that after death, she becomes ajnabi, like that.
Yeah. So that's like yeah. So that's why they do a qiyas. Once she's passed away, she's like an ajnabi. Yeah, that's what they say. She's like an ajnabi. That's why we give her the same ruling as any other woman. No, sahih.
Any more questions, brother? or else inshallah we can end the session today.
The brother Abdul Qayyum asked me a question privately. Wallahu alam. I'll be honest, my guess is probably no, but I don't know. I've not read. I actually don't know. I've not read any kalam of the ulama on that, so I don't want to give an answer. Okay, I think that's it, inshallah.
Inshallah, with that, yes, with that, inshallah, we can end the session today. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh, for your time, and inshallah, on Wednesday, I'll consult with the brothers if there is a possibility to start a little earlier.
Yeah.
Inshallah, I'll let you know, inshallah, Sheikh.
Yeah, the only reason for that is so that we don't go too late at night.
Inshallah, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Jazakallah. Jazakallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.